Greetings to colleagues at University of Virginia. I'm Ron Nazer, and I'm in Chicago, Evanston, Illinois, 2 days before Independence Day, July 4th. Stephen Meng has been a colleague for a number of years, and he asked me to put down some thoughts as to how we have been using Thomas Jefferson, or misusing Thomas Jefferson, and the Declaration of Independence to make some points about American philosophy and its practice. My field in the past several decades has been in management education, and particularly sustainable management education. We are feeling that there's been a big flaw in the MBA model. I'll say more about that later. And we proposed new ways of thinking, this American pragmatism. When I was asked one time, Ron, why do you believe so strongly in this way of inquiry, this pragmatism? What examples do you have? And we've used it in different organizations, and students and executives who've gone through the process of the scientific method of pragmatism. But about this time of year, in the paper appeared the Declaration of Independence. And I read it and I went, oh my gosh, Jefferson's a pragmatist. This is a logical statement of exactly what we do with what we call this arc of pragmatic inquiry. And so Stephen said, well, maybe you should come to Virginia and find out more about it. And so that's the basic thought. This is not a presentation. It is going to be an outline. It is a PowerPoint, which I'm going to go to in a minute. But at least give you an idea of the kinds of thoughts that we'd like to share with you, and see if they make sense in terms of reforming certainly my field of management education, but education generally along the genius of what Jefferson and my hero, Dr. William Small, did with Jefferson. I wanted to say that we have several books that I at least wanted to show you out of this library behind me. The one that has been very helpful to me has been by Gary Wills. It's a book that I'm sure many of you know, called Inventing America. And even the idea of inventing America, we are positioning Jefferson as an entrepreneur, and he invented a pretty good idea with a lot of help, of course, of the democracy. And it's called Inventing America, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. This has been enormously helpful to me. The other one is a more technical book, and it's entitled The Scottish Enlightenment and the American College Ideal, looking at that period of time, late 1600s, 1700s to the 1800s. And I found that to be very helpful as well. So I'm going to become a postage stamp in just a moment, and then I'll take you through the thoughts for a general conversation. Thanks for listening, and I will tell you, I owe you all a great debt in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, I'm back. That's me up in the corner, a little postage stamp. But as I say, this is, again, not a presentation, but I just wanted to put some thoughts down on paper so you can see a line of reasoning. And a lot of these things have been part of my work with executives and with students, primarily in the area of management education. So it's a proposed conversation with the faculty of UVA as to how I've been using the Declaration of Independence as a framework, as an example of American pragmatic philosophy practice, and specifically in my case, management education. And the contrast and the connection has been between William Small and Thomas Jefferson. So just a bit of background, I'll send my CV along, but it's the study of pragmatism. I've been at this, my dissertation, I got my, my PhD at 55. As I like to say, it's not the sign of a bright student, but a persistent one. That's the book on the left. It's in its second edition, and it comes out of the UN, the Principles for Responsible Management Education Secretariat, which has been very helpful in framing this conversation. The book on the right has really grounded me in the terrific educational model, obviously, Oxford, as to how working with the Department of Educational Studies over there for the past 20 years have been enormously helpful in having me understand what exactly the process of education as they have practiced it is. So I also want to say full disclosure that These thoughts are really in a chapter that we're working on for a third book on sustainable management education. And we're calling it The Battle for the Soul of Capitalism. And a lot of us feel that way, that with the whole, everything that's going on, the management mind has got to take responsibility for a lot of the problems we're having in society. And we have had, just as a rough cover idea, it's the pursuit of happiness, which we take as a foundational idea, and I'll say more about that later, and an unfolding drama of learning. Are we learning? And we take as our baseline the Declaration of Independence and this wonderful scratched up copy of Jefferson and we think Adams and Franklin making changes. So just that's full disclosure that this is a section of a larger effort to engage management in rethinking their purpose. So this is a proposed line of inquiry on Jefferson, Small, and education. The practice of pragmatism in management education and entrepreneurship. I'm saying that Jefferson was an entrepreneur, of course. They were all tinkerers, and we know that about Franklin as well. Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. So quick overview, 5, and as I say, I'm going to go through these very quickly, but you'll at least get an idea of the flow of ideas. What's the problem? Environmental and social unsustainability. It's coming at us and as a major, major crisis, as we all know. The challenge we're saying is a lot of it has to do with management education, how we've been educating managers, certainly for the last 100 years within the MBA. The solution, we think, is a way of thinking. It's unique American philosophy, and the Declaration of Independence and the relationship between Jefferson and Small is our case point. Then we'll talk about educational practices. We've pulled this together. We're tinkerers in philosophy. So if Jefferson or Franklin come up with the Franklin stove, well, we've come up with a way of pragmatic inquiry. So we'll tell you about that. And the last is to keep a journal. Problem, environmental and social unsustainability. When in the course of human events, we are here today. Again, very quickly through this, UN material. The UN has been enormously helpful in framing conversations, and we'll say that more about the genius of what Franklin and Jefferson and Adams and the rest of them did. So this was a big step. Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Conference on Human Environment, 72, Brundtland Commission, 87, Global Compact, if you're familiar with all these, much more to be said about all of them. Then there was the evolution from the UN Millennium Development Goals and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Great, we all know about that. This is a major effort that 191 countries have signed up on, as they did also with the Paris Agreement as well. What we've taken from it, we've taken this logo, Transforming Our World, and there's a group of about 70 of us around the world, all in management education. We're billed as radical management educators. And so we've taken seriously our focus on education, hence what we're going to talk about next. So we think the challenge is management education. This was, and I'm not going to take you to the site, but it was a remarkable gathering last June, understanding and overcoming the roadblocks to sustainability. Essentially what they said is that we've been at this for a long time and we're not making headway. This is the Harvard Business School saying that. So a friend of ours, and there were 50% of the attendees for this one-day conference were business historians, in connection to Jefferson. A colleague of ours, MIT, gave the keynote address, and essentially what he said is that we are lost for words. We lack the vocabulary, methods, patience, and systemic vision to address the root causes of our failing organizations. He concluded with this. There was some nervous laughter and then some applause, but he just thinks that we have to turn the whole thing upside down with management education. 4 days later, Harvard came up with this report as environmental sustainability lost its relevance. Again, quickly, what they said here was, we thought, quite remarkable, that they had this idea, the way the human thought process works, and a new and holistic way of thinking. What might that be? New and holistic way of thinking. So we felt the solution was, and the point we made to them, that the solution was pragmatism. And a subset of pragmatism in our case point is Declaration of Independence. An answer for new and holistic ways of thinking was first formally articulated at Harvard as the unique American philosophy, pragmatism. Here they were. Peirce Royce, James Dewey, subject of my dissertation. Pragmatism is a principle and method of right thinking. So it wasn't what you thought, it was how you thought about these things. And so this is the one that we have found set off this whole very rich area that was picked up by all kinds of people, very short, very short. John Dewey is one, how we think, one of the great educators, learning from experience, learning from experience. One of his best books we've found is Reweaving the Social Fabric, which is what, in essence, the Declaration of Independence was about, reweaving the social fabric. This is with he and Jane Addams, University of Chicago. So what we came to in our educational model, reframing management education, purpose and program design, it's not what we know, it's how we learn what we know. That was the philosophy for the school. So what's an example? This is where I would turn to the Declaration of Independence. It is a scientific, moral, and political, as well as a revolutionary, and it is a logical statement. So the difference here, and this is back to why that we think it's so central with this idea of pursuit of happiness, is because many people have felt that John Locke was the guide for Declaration of Independence, and his big headline was life, liberty, and property. So why wasn't that used? Because of the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers. Much, much, much to be said about this. Hutcheson, Smith, Ferguson. And they were the ones who talked about moral sense, moral sentiment is how Smith did it. And who was Jefferson's teacher? Dr. William Small. And he was studying under all these folks in Edinburgh and Glasgow and Marischal University. This was the one that got me. From his conversation, I got my first views of the expansion of science into the system of things in which we are placed. That, when in the course of human events, that idea has been one that I'll say more about in a few minutes, but that's the one that got me. Then this one were the other nuggets. To his enlightened and affectionate guidance of my studies while at college, I'm indebted for everything. He first introduced me to both schools of philosophy and mathematics, rational and elevated courses of study, an extraordinary conjunction of eloquence and logic, was enabled to communicate them to the students with great effect. I can't tell you how important that has been in my own educational philosophy, because essentially we are teaching eloquence and logic. Can you tell a good story? Sounds trivial, but we use again the Declaration of Independence as our example. So you've seen the drafts, you know all about that. You've seen that. There they were. There was the A team getting together, the first string, presenting the document. So what was in it? That's when I read it. It was a conjunction of eloquence and logic. And that he got from William Small. So in inquiry, you begin. And he began. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary. You set an hypothesis that you're going to test. I'm not going to take you through all this. You all know this stuff far better than I do. But we hold these truths to be self-evident. So they had an hypothesis to test. And they said, a government that is run by a despot must be overthrown. They began with an hypothesis. What did they do then? They explored. And this, you know, the exhaustive list. He refused, he dissolved, he forbade, he refused, he called together, he obstructed, and so on. You know all that. Let's explore. Interpret. What does the data mean? The data means that the guy's a tyrant. So what do you do then? You decide. You say, all right, we are going to declare ourselves independent. And then they acted, pledging their fortunes, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. That is as good an example of the process that we saw of the pragmatists doing. So how do we actually do it? Here are just three quick examples. This is what we did it's a capstone course at DePaul. What's my big idea for sustainable development? And we show what I just showed you and said, well, Jefferson helped invent a country. What's your big idea? What are you going to do about this? And what are my values driving it? Here's a program we did through Presidio and students from UEAN in Bogota, Colombia. What's my interest in innovation in sustainable management? And we took them to northern Silicon Valley. Here's a program Stephen and I have worked on in Hangzhou, China. We call it toward a sustainable socio-economic, ecological civilization. Again, putting the context, and here is, I'll say more about the process in a minute. We've also worked on the idea in China of making these links between the true arc of pragmatic inquiry and the pursuit of happiness. I've been appointed a wonderful position, pragmatic philosophy and ecological economics. What is happiness in a finite world? Challenging the economic stories of East and West. So this is how we framed it as begin, explore, interpret, decide, and act. Context, continuity, and fallibilism. Where did we say? Begin. We have the students come together and call your attention to the fourth one. They have to set their hypothesis, just like I said Jefferson did. And the big one is, the fourth one is the values. Why are you doing this? What are your values? So that's the begin part. Then they explore. And they explore, this is where, again, as we call it, a stakeholder market ecosystem map. Ed Freeman of Darden fame is a great stakeholder master, helping us think about these things. Well, we packaged this along with Pat Werheim, helped on this. She's over at Darden as well. And so what at the middle of it is the needs. What are the needs that people have? This, in essence, I got my first views of the expansion of science, the system of how things in which we are placed. That's what we have the students do. And it is always an eye-opener for them. Then they interpret the data. What does it mean? What would it mean in action? They then decide, and then they act. And then it's always a process of beginning again. That's why we use the baseline of the Declaration of Independence, but then we work with Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address and move this all through time up through the learning that we're doing today. So we call it the arc of, true arc of pragmatic inquiry and Confucian great learning. Stephen, we found the great learning fits very well. It's 5 steps for Confucius, no less. They tend to fit. So we are claiming that this is a universal way of thinking. Last thing we have them do is keep a journal. This is the one we use at DePaul. We tailor the basic process to whatever the needs are of the particular institution or organization that we're using. And then we make the point in saying, this is what the scientific revolution was about, and why Small, with his genius of bringing together natural and moral philosophy together, was done with these folks. These are all journals. So we tell the students, keep a journal, like I said. And of course, it led to the great breakthrough that they all were so taken by when in the course of human events is Jefferson was almost rethinking the Newtonian universe. Jefferson's pocket notes, I'd love to see those in person. Jefferson's garden, always doodling. And then we take them through some other examples and just say, people have always been doing these different kinds of ideas in all kinds of different ways, but they have been keeping track of like a sketchbook. Picasso. Oh, this one I don't have to explain to anybody. They'll say, Mordor, we know where that is. Love this one, Marx. And Feynman explained electrodynamics with two little drawings. And then, of course, the famous Edison is first example. I should show you that one. The students all love that. That's Bob Dylan. So we conclude with philosophers and poets. And this was the line from Dewey, the educator, views teaching and learning as the continuous process of the reconstruction of experience. And Jefferson and all of them kept talking about that. Learn, learn, learn. This was at the Harvard Business School, one of the great pragmatist philosophers, Albert North Whitehead. Philosophy is an attempt to clarify those fundamental beliefs, which finally determine the emphasis of attention that lies at the base of character. We say that that's what we're forming with these values-driven strategies. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people. So we remind students again that you're in the course of human events. And so what did Jefferson do? We tell them, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And we say that what Jefferson did is he invented America. And so Jefferson was an American entrepreneur and a pragmatist. And so we urge the students to think about reconceiving how we have brought together our organizations to do the work that we all need to do to make the world sustainable, environmentally, and socially just. So those are the thoughts. I will pause for a moment. Okay, so that is as I say, a rough run through, but I've used elements of that, as you can see, in all kinds of different ways. But essentially, it is to engage students, executives, people who are interested in doing something to make the world better. And I just found it so inspirational to say, how big of an idea can we have? Although I will tell you that when we were over in China, I was talking about our 250-year history of philosophy I was going to tell them about. And the speaker before me unrolled the scroll of 5,000 years of Chinese philosophy. But we do have a way of thinking. It's the one that we want to encourage more people to engage in. We think it will lead to much better results. So thank you. Hope this has been useful. And I'm sure Stephen will follow up with you. Any other questions, let me know. But again, I'm so grateful for all the work that you're doing to continue the Jeffersonian tradition of education. Thank you.